I'm going to read an interview with Kenneth Williams done by Martin Fright for the 125th issue of Gay News, which was the 5th anniversary of the paper. And it was quite a coup, I think, to get Kenneth Williams, and it's certainly an excellent interview. I don't think Martin did too many interviews for us. He essentially was a friend of the editor, Dennis Lemon. Anyway, suddenly this very gorgeous man with black curly hair and a very wicked grin started appearing at Gay News offices, and he became Dennis's assistant during a particularly difficult time for the paper, which was the blasphemy trial at the Old Bailey, which took place in July of that year. So here we are. I think it's an excellent piece, and it's called Kenneth Williams Stops Messing About and Talks to Martin Fright. Kenneth Williams lives in a small, quiet flat just off the Marylebone Road. You have to tap on the door because the bell has been disconnected. The noise was shocking, he explains apologetically. Inside, the decor and furnishings are sober, almost austere. Apart from copies of the Times and the Times Literary Supplement lying casually on the floor, there's nothing personal and certainly nothing pretentious about his living room, where we sit drinking coffee from plain white cups. The only clue to Williams' tastes or interests lies in the enormous number of books, but there's nothing show-busy here either. They seem to be mainly on historical or biographical subjects. There is a record player, but no television. Williams despises the TV in spite of his obvious success in that particular medium. The way Williams lives is the measure of his own nature. He's small and slight, his hair neatly brushed, and his features much sharper and more intelligently questioning than one remembers from his appearances on the screen. His clothes seem a little too big for him, and he carries a slightly dated look. Baggy grey trousers, white shirt and narrow knitted tie. He smokes fairly heavily, but he concedes wistfully smoking is his only vice. At first he is disarmingly businesslike. Well, what do you want to know? But gradually he relaxes into an anecdotal mood, which is distinctly off the record. There's an awkward moment when he spots my tape recorder. "Hope you're not going to use that thing," he says. "I can't stand them." I reassure him that the notebook and pencil will be quite adequate, and he appears mollified. As we talked with increasing candour, it was obvious that a permanent record on tape might have inhibited his easy flow of stories and recollections, many of them quite unprintable. Kenneth Williams is a deeply religious man. I began by asking him if he felt that his Christianity had coloured his attitude to his career. "My faith makes me completely unaware of my own importance. You see, the purposes of God's creation have absolutely nothing to do with material achievement. My work merely provides the staff of life, the wherewithal to live. I don't have a vocation. Now, Tolstoy and Thomas More, they had a vocation, but I don't regard my work as such. For me, my work is simply a practicality. I'm not promulgating any sort of message, so my career is quite separate from my spiritual life. As Jesus says in the Bible about paying tribute to Rome, I merely render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I believe in paying my rates and taxes, but that's where my duty ends." William stands quite firm on this. He would never leave England for some tax haven in the Mediterranean, and you sense that he disapproves strongly of those who do. He is, however, very concerned about what he sees as the increasing intrusion of the state on the liberties of the individual. He regards the welfare state as a sort of benign dictatorship which says, "We know what's good for you." Wearing crash helmets and safety belts or smoking cigarettes should be a matter of personal choice, and all the time, he argues, the welfare state is preventing us from making our own decisions. Kenneth Williams is best known for his roles in the Carry On series and his many radio appearances, particularly with Kenneth Horne and Tony Hancock, but he's also played classic and other serious parts. I wondered if he felt that comedy was more challenging than tragedy. They're merely different sides of the same coin, he thought. The problem of acting tragedy or comedy comes when you go on stage. There's an enormous difference between the idea and the act. I thought at first it was simply a matter of learning your lines and saying them, but it isn't like that at all. When you realise that for the first time there is a moment of absolute crisis, The very first time I appeared on stage, I had no conception of the impact of an auditorium, and that was only in the school play. There is a desperate battle to command attention, which is quite formidable until you're used to it, and if you aren't, it can be totally inhibiting. I've got used to it now, of course. These days I can gauge an audience within 2 minutes. Comedy is particularly difficult, though, because of a curious chemical amalgam of reciprocity between the actor and the audience. Every time you go on stage, you ask yourself if that reciprocity is going to be there, because if it isn't, the comedy is impossible to establish. That's what makes comedy such a tightrope. One of my problems is that I've often lost my temper on stage, and that's always lost me the audience. Williams worked with Tony Hancock for 4 years in the early 60s. He was unwilling to make any generalisations about Hancock's character, but he did tell me one story which he felt said it all. I went once to visit Tony in the London clinic where he was undergoing a crash diet, glass of warm water a day, that sort of thing. His doctors were worried about fatty degeneration of the heart. Anyway, I went to visit him there, and spread out before him on the bed were copies of Leibniz, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, H.G. Wells' History of the World, the bit where he talks about Marx and Hegel. Well, I asked Tony what he was doing with all these books, and he looked up at me and he said, "I'm trying to find the meaning of it all. What if there's no one up there? What if it's all a big joke?" So I said to him, "Well, it is all a joke. It's up to us to make it a good one." And you just think about it. If what Tony said was true, it would make a nonsense of the whole history of mankind. Well, wouldn't it? Williams is famous for his voices, the camp, mincing one, the geriatric, croaking one, or the blustery, upper crust one. What is so surprising, then, is the tone of conviction, sometimes of passionate intensity, when he speaks of religion, politics, or men he has known and respected. Here there is a depth and reflective intelligence which is a far cry from the inanities of Julian and Sandy. The many voices and faces of Kenneth Williams are potential upstages for even the greatest comedian. In fact, it was for this reason that Williams was sacked by Hancock. I was overbalancing the series, he explained. Hancock's was actually a perfectly legitimate complaint. Galton and Simpson had written for me as a cardboard character who walked into the programme and said, "Here, stop messing about." And got a big laugh, and that was it. Well, Hancock said to me, "I want it out. I want no part of that sort of humour." And I think that was fair enough. As soon as he left Hancock's half hour, Williams began work with Kenneth Horne on Beyond Our Ken, which later became Round the Horn. He has very fond memories of Horne. He was the most genial man I ever worked with, the most genial man I ever met. With Kenneth Horne, every single laugh was welcomed, and he didn't care how he got it or who got it, whether it was me or Hugh Paddock or Betty Marsden or himself. "Think of the scene," he always said, and the scripts were transformed simply by that comic atmosphere he created. I asked Williams why he enjoyed playing Julian so much. Was it anything to do with him and his friend Sandy being such overtly gay characters, perhaps? No, I enjoyed playing Julian and Sandy for a completely different reason. I really enjoyed the provocative nature of the role. I was always provoking Hugh, and he'd slip into the familiar voice, go on, purge yourself, don't hold it back, go on, tell him. This was the comedy of the open confessional, the provoker and the confessor. It was all completely ad-libbed, of course, all a matter of gauging the audience for comic timing. In the end, Hugh's confession was almost always completely ridiculous, but it always brought the house down. Williams was, for many years, a friend and confidant of gay playwright Joe Orton. I asked Williams first about Orton's place in English drama. "Well, I think there will be a place for Orton as long as the English comedy of manners is performed. He's like Wilde, Peacock and Peake as well, even though they weren't playwrights. Yes, there's something very Gothic about Orton, very mannered." I asked if Williams had ever attempted to censor any of Orton's plays before they were performed. No, there's a big difference between a play and a script. It's like the difference between journalism and literature. When I got a script with, "oh, gods" all over the place, I'd take them out and say, "oh dear" or something. If you say it in the right way, you get just as big a laugh. But a play is different. I would never want to change what a playwright had written, because I believe that there is a fundamental seriousness in drama which there just isn't in a comedy script. I asked Williams about Orton's views on religion. Joe was unreligiously religious. He was always questioning in his plays, but those questions were all leading towards an affirmation of life. He questioned bigotry, hypocrisy, all that was bogus in society. Take the character of Inspector Truscott in Loot, which was written for me. Now, Truscott was based on a real police inspector who planted bricks on demonstrating students and then had them arrested for carrying offensive weapons. He even camped out in Hyde Park. These elements of the fantastic and the bizarre really appealed to Joe. He was totally absorbed by the character, and that's how Truscott got into Loot. Truscott attempted to justify subterfuge by the law, and this appalled Orton. It appalls me. I suggested that Orton's nature was basically anarchic, and Williams agreed. He was like all creative artists. He rebelled against society. He rebelled against the establishment and authority of any sort. He hated, for example, society's hypocrisy over homosexuality. This he found utterly reprehensible. I wondered if Kenneth Williams was also an anti-establishment figure in any way. He pondered, lit another cigarette, and looked up in an almost boyish way with a charmingly innocent smile. Well, I'll tell you, I've had invitations to Downing Street, and I've always said, no thanks. You know, I write back and say, thank you for the invite. I always write invite. But alas, my wardrobe does not extend to this sort of elegance. Then his tone changed abruptly to one of snarling scorn. No, I don't want to be accepted by the governing classes. I have to be free from that sort of thing. Williams draws an extended parallel between Bernard Shaw's refusal of public honours and his own unwillingness to be drawn into public life. As I say, my job isn't important to me. I'm not really interested in getting on. I just take what comes. And I'm not by nature gregarious. I'm egregious. Do you know what that means? I avoid all forms of effort, all sport. I've always avoided exercise. I prefer to be on my own. I'd rather sit down and read a book than indulge in a wild social life. For me, social life implies small talk, and I'm not interested in small talk. In fact, I think it's hypocritical for actors or comedians to socialise with people 1 minute and the next to take them off or attack them in the theatre. But then, I suppose acting itself is a refined form of hypocrisy. As Emerson said, you have as many faces as friends. Many people would regard Julian and Sandy as archetypal camp gays. I asked Williams if he accepted the word camp as being a valid one. Yes, it's just gone into the OED, hasn't it? I think I agree with what Christopher Isherwood says in his new book, that high camp is ballet, but not theatre, Baroque, but not Gothic. He didn't think that Betty Davis was camp, but Carol Channing was. Nor did he regard himself as camp. Certainly I'm a character actor, caricature really, and this means exaggeration. But in Carry On Cowboy, I played a real old-timer, he demonstrates graphically, which was based on an American film producer I actually knew. I don't know, I suppose. I suppose a camp is really a matter of embellishment, distorting vocal idiosyncrasies, and so often the only way to play a part is to play it in high camp. Kenneth Williams has been attacked by gays for damaging the cause of gay rights by offering to the general public a stereotyped gay image. Williams is indignant at this charge. Not only does he regard Julian and Sandy as bringing homosexuality into people's homes at a time when it was far less socially acceptable than it is now, but he was also a member of the Albany Trust, which grew out of the Homosexual Law Reform Society and pressured for law reform before the 1967 Sexual Offences Act. And although he's hostile to organisations such as CHE, the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, he is warm in his enthusiasm for gay news, in particular for its supportive role in the gay community as a whole. After all, he says, for some people, it's the only lifeline they've got. I asked Williams if he thought he had many gay fans. I've never really understood my fan mail, he replies cautiously. Much of it seems to come from children, schools, that sort of thing. I suppose that's all to do with the Carry On series. Recently, I even got a round robin from Havana, signed by 100 people. Amazing. I even saw a billing for one of the Carry On films when I was on holiday in Yugoslavia. Although Williams' professional life has been a very full one, he remains a very solitary character. Depressed by the apparent casualness of relationships he has seen, he seems studiously to have avoided them. I suggested then that he might have had some regrets. Was there anything in his life he would have done differently? The answer was surprisingly positive. I would have paid more attention to the plight of the elderly. They have a humour entirely their own. Yes, you must keep in touch with the old, and it's not enough to just devote yourself to keeping up with your own elderly relations. Joe Orton and William's mother were great friends. She apparently would chat about her youth, and he would entertain her with his homosexual exploits. They got on marvellous, said Williams with a benign glimmer in his eyes. Is he ambitious? I have a very English sense of humour. I remember one of the Queen's speeches some time back during one of the Labour governments. My government is going to introduce austerity measures, she said. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be marvellous if she looked at the Prime Minister straight in the eye, pointed to her crown and said, but you're not having that. I suggested then that perhaps he had a secret ambition to deliver the Queen's speech. He lit a cigarette, lay back in his chair and smiled beatifically. Perhaps, he reflected, perhaps.